Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
For WXXI, this is Connections, filling in for Evan Dawson. I'm Gino Finelli. Today's connection was made last night at the William A. Johnson Jr. Terminal Building at the Port of Rochester. That venue played host to the State of the City Address, an annual speech in which the mayor of Rochester lays out his plans for the future of the city, the accomplishments of their term in office, and the good and the bad in the city. It was a major speech for Mayor Malik Evans, the last of his first term in office. During the speech, Evans highlighted accomplishments across housing, public safety, economic development, poverty, and myriad of other hallmarks of his term in office. To discuss the state of the city, I'm joined by Mayor Malik Evans. Mayor, thanks for being here.
Hey, great to see you. And I see you gave Evan the time off, so you drew the short straw. So
I did, yeah. So here I am. So we got a lot to get through here across all the different things that are happening in the city. But we'll start by talking about the theme of this year's State of the City is momentum. That word was used 52 times throughout the speech.
But who's counting?
Me.
You, right.
Me and Brian Sharp are counting.
Of course.
And before we get into all the details and the actual issues themselves, what does that term mean?
I mean, momentum means you want to continue on the trajectory that you are, particularly when you look back at where we were. And I think that for a lot of people, it's easy to sometimes forget because there is so much going on in the world. But when I took office, 1 million people had died in America from COVID. Basically, everything had stopped at a standstill. Building in Rochester had stopped. Every program that was serving young people pretty much was paused. There was still a debate about whether or not kids should be going back to school. So the momentum that had happened, that was going on in the 17, 18, 19, even when we saw reductions in crime in 17, 18, 19, all of that had stopped as a result of the virus. And then my first day in office, and I mentioned this in the speech yesterday, I wasn't even in office 24 hours, and then I get a call of Julius Greer being murdered, 14-year-old kid being murdered. So we had to say, what can we do to try to bring our city back to a place where we could start to invest again, to be able to build homes, to be able to build affordable housing, to be able to put a stopper on the amount of violence that we were seeing. And then we started to see these things start happening. So the first year was better than the previous year. And then last year, particularly as it relates to violence, we saw 53% reductions in shootings and 45% reductions in homicides. And I wanted to say, let's keep this momentum going, but not just on that side, but also on the economic development side. Rochester is one of the few cities in New York State that are building thousands of affordable new housing units. We've been recognized. I just finished shooting a testimonial video for New York State Homes and Community Renewal, where people around the state are looking at what Rochester is doing to accelerate the pace of affordable housing development. Our work around our Buy the Block program, and not just our Buy the Block program, that's only a complement to the other building that folks in the private sector are also doing. So the word, why we use the word momentum was because we want to continue to accelerate that. And then I also wanted to remind people that you can't take it for granted. I mean, this is hard work. The only place success comes before work is in the dictionary. And it's very easy to stop momentum. It's hard to get it started, but it's very easy to stop it. And one of the ways that you can do it is to take your eye off the ball, to no longer be focused on the issues that matter, because there's so much other stuff that swirls around. And so that's why we use the word momentum. It's also why we do the State of the City address. I mean, some people have said, okay, they're old school, State of the Union, State of the City. Why do you still do these things? Mm-hmm. And every year I go to the team, I say, should we just throw like a big party and then have people come around and I tell them what we're doing? And I said, no, I think it's still important to tell people how I see where we are, where we were, where we're going, and where we hope to be in the future. So that's why we still do the State of the City, and that's why momentum was the theme. But I think it also fits into the last 3 years, in which the first year was kind of about planting the seeds and helping our people bloom. It was about that. And then last year we talked a lot about hope begets opportunity and perceive these things that are springing forth. All those things that I talked about last year, they hadn't yet bloomed yet. But now this year, a lot of them were seeing the fruits of that labor, and that is what is giving us the momentum. And that's why you heard momentum mentioned. How many times did you say?
52 times.
52 times. Man, I wish I could have got it to 60, but 52 times, I'll take that.
So there's a lot to get to here, and the first thing that I really want to spend some time talking about is public safety.
Yeah.
You inherited a time in Rochester where post-pandemic and in the pandemic, like what was happening across the country.
Across the country, right.
Particularly acutely in Rochester, we were having a strong spate of violent crime. Just for some numbers here, between March 17th, 2021 and 2022, 430 people were shot in the city. That was around the peak period during the pandemic era. And as of April 21st of 2025, between that year 2024 and 2025, that number was 187.
Yeah.
Which is less than half of the previous figure. But is that good enough?
Oh, it's never good enough, man. It's never good enough. And see, that's the problem. I think I'm a different type of leader, and you get these people that that sometimes will try to misconstrue your words. I'll hear people say, "Oh, he's celebrating 187 shootings." No, what we're celebrating is the progress of the downward trajectory. And it's why I still have the gun violence state of emergency, because there is nothing more sick or insidious than someone picking up a gun and shooting somebody. I mean, that should be as rare as a plane crash, and I say that regularly. Now, granted, we do have plane crashes. They're tragic when they happen, but they are so rare. It's not something that we see every day. And that's the way a shooting should be. There's no reason why we should be having any shootings in our country or in our city that are mainly 99.9% of them are people who know each other, and they're all retaliatory disputes. I mean, I went back and just looked at some of the people that were shot and why they may have done it. And you know what the number one reason is? People say disrespect. They felt disrespected.
An argument, usually.
An argument.
Yeah.
It was disrespect. And it's not like it's a random people. Now, we may have some random shootings, which we do. But, I mean, it's like 0.01% of the shootings are just random. Almost every single one of them are individuals that are known to each other, and they're also almost over an argument. So it's just totally unnecessary, and we want to continue to drive those numbers down. And, some people will say, oh, it's going down nationally. Well, it's not going. In some places, it is not. In some places, they are. But what we have done in Rochester is be extremely deliberate about having an actual plan in order to make this happen. I mean, it's just not something you can put something out in the ether and say, we're going to bring down shootings. You have to have a concerted plan. And boy, has this been a lot of work. It has not been easy to do this. I mean, I have deployed every single tool in my arsenal to be able to do that. Prevention, making sure that I give 12 and 13-year-olds stipends to be able to get them to learn what it means to work, expanding the number of young people that are working, advancing mental health services in our recreation centers, something that I never would have thought we'd have to do in the city of Rochester, but we've done that. We expanded our person in crisis team. When I started person in crisis team, I was on city council when it first kicked off. It was a pilot, and there were 2.5 full-time people. We've now expanded that into a entire department. So we had to do that from the preventative side. And then going to the state to get more dollars for our gun-involved violence elimination program, which targets individuals who have a propensity to want to create havoc in the streets, such as picking up a firearm or gun and then collaborating with community organizations, and then launching the Rochester Peace Collective. And I noticed I call it the Rochester Peace Collective, not the Malik Peace Collective, because a leader understands, and this was another part of the speech, Gino, you were there covering it, that I talked about. If you notice, I didn't talk about me and how I started this, I did this. I came up with the idea for the Rochester Peace Collective. I came up with the name. But you know what? You know who's making the Rochester Peace Collective successful? Those 50-plus organizations that are involved there. So the other thing I wanted to do is tell people that the momentum exists not because Malik Evans is the mayor, but because Malik Evans is the mayor has really done something unprecedented and opened up the door to hundreds of thousands of regular, everyday citizens to help us plot the course in which we want to see in our city. And that's different. And that's different for most politicians who love seeing their names on things, that love standing up saying, I came up with this, I did that. You've never seen that from me. And you always hear me say, we. Because in order for cities to be able to thrive and be successful, you have to engage the citizens to be with you at the side. And it's what I said in my inaugural address when I said, I want to be a mayor where I say I have the partners of the citizens with me at City Hall, and we did that. And that momentum is also being built by the NIA program, which I rolled out. 47 organizations, grassroots organizations, supported by ESL Federal Credit Union, City of Rochester, and the Rochester Area Community Foundation, to come up with community-based programs to build cohesion, in which we lost that momentum after COVID. Community organizations weren't meeting; they couldn't because they thought they would get sick and die. So how do we re-engage and re-energize that? And that was the NIA program in which we rolled out. So that's why momentum is so important. That's why it was so important to make sure that we really use that word a lot, but more importantly, say that this isn't my momentum, but this is our momentum. And I hope that is what came through last night.
So I want to talk another trend in crime here, which was auto thefts that really picked up in 2023. This, again, was a national trend, but Rochester was particularly hard hit.
Yep. Kia and Hyundai.
Yeah, Kia and Hyundai had just exponential increases in thefts in 2023. Yep. It went down a little bit in 2024, actually a good bit, and then it continued to come down this year, but it's still relatively high. And I think this speaks to another portion of one of your focuses in time in office with is youth services. A kid stealing a car doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a lot of things that happened leading up to that led to them making the choice to do that. So why do you think it particularly was a trend here in Rochester that this happened, and what can be done about it?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think it was a trend in Rochester because not just but it wasn't a trend just in Rochester. I first heard about this trend from the mayor of Milwaukee. He said, "Have you ever heard of something called the Kia Boys?" And I said, "No." I said, "I haven't heard of that. We don't have that in Rochester yet." He said, "You will." And then we did, and it moved west to east. So it came from Milwaukee, the western cities, and then Rochester, and then Syracuse got hit, then Albany. It was a social media trend that really hit it. But I think it speaks to the larger trend of making sure that we provide opportunities for our young people, but also that we make sure that we deal with the whole family. And this is why the JEDS program that we partnered with the county executive is so very important, because you cannot, to your point, Gino, you cannot look at a kid and say, "Oh yeah, they just woke up and decided to steal a car one day." No. There are lots of other indicators that show you whether or not a kid is going to go and steal a car. Are they attending school on a regular basis? Are they reading on grade level by third grade? Do they have a supportive adult in the home? Is their parent working 1 or 2 or 3 jobs? These are all indicators. Are they involved in an extracurricular activity? If a kid is involved in an extracurricular activity or has a job, the chances of them stealing a car or getting into any trouble is almost nil. All of the data shows that. The Search Institute has the 40 developmental assets of internal and external assets that kids should have. The closer they are to those 40 assets, the better they are in terms of being productive members of society. So to your point, these things don't happen in a vacuum. So the thing is how can we intervene before they decide that they do want to steal a car? And then after they steal a car, how do you make sure that you drive down that propensity to make sure that it's something that they're not going to do again? And that's why the JEDS program has been so effective for us in the county of Monroe and the city of Rochester, because it stopped and cut back the number of kids who became repeat offenders. And we said, okay, look, you can go to school. You may have to wear a ID bracelet so that we know where you are. But you're gonna have to go to school. You're gonna have to go into a treatment program. And if you don't, then you're gonna go over to the Children's Detention Center. And most of them do not want to go to the Children's Detention Center. They cry like little babies when they're there. So it's that route that you give them. And then when you give them that route, they start to make other choices. But if you give a kid a choice of a job or some community-based organization that they could be a part of, they will choose those things. The other point I wanted to make, and I promised young people I would do this, because last week school was out, and I was with young people from Jack and Jill. I was with young people from the Hillside Work Scholarship Program. I was with kids from Rock Music. The vast majority of our young people are not stealing cars. The number of kids that steal cars and wreak mayhem in our community is levels in the less than hundreds. Now, it gets all that attention, but the vast majority of our young people and their parents are looking for positive activities. But we have to make sure we zero in on that number of what I call youth at risk. And that's why the mental health services that we pushed into libraries, that we pushed into our rec centers are so very, very important. And I think that's how you stem the tide of those wanting to steal a car. But you can't just deal with the kid alone in isolation. You got to deal with the entire family. Otherwise, we're just missing the boat. You cannot solve this problem along with just saying, I'm going to deal with Gino, and then not going to the home to see what's going on with his mom, his dad, his grandmother, his uncle, or whoever else is in that household. If we continue to try to do it in isolation, that won't happen. And I think that's why JEDS is so important, because the county has the comprehensive approach, because they have social services, they have the mental health department, they have a lot of the agencies that are responsible for dealing with the human service issues. The city has picked some of that up, but it's really the county that takes the lead on a lot of that. And if you want to see these numbers continue to go down, we have to make sure that we continue to put investments there.
So we got a few questions from email here, but one on the topic that is a question that I have to deal with a lot, and I'm sure you have to deal with a lot too, is Michael. He's a lifelong resident of Rochester, says it just doesn't feel like there has been a 38% decrease in crime. It just doesn't feel like it. The perception is that even though you can list off all these data points, that the perception is that crime is still up.
Yeah, well, I think there's a feeling, but the facts are the facts, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and I tell people that all the time. They say, I don't feel that way. Well, the facts are the facts. 53% reduction in homicides. I mean, either 500 people were shot or they weren't, right? And you just gave the number of the low point that we just reached. 178 people were shot. That is less than 500 plus people that were shot before. So the numbers are down. I think a lot of it is personal safety. I think a lot of it is feeling, because if you know that less people have gotten shot, but then your car gets stolen, then you don't feel safe, and that matters to people. And that's why I never declare victory. I declare momentum, but I won't declare victory, because there's still too much work to do. And that's why I guess I'm a little bit of a different elected official, because most elected officials will plant their flag and say, hey, I solved crime, let's move on to something else. And what I'm saying is, no, I'm gratified but not satisfied yet, and we still have to continue to move forward. And yes, 53% is a huge reduction, but still one person getting shot. Or if you're the one person whose car was just stolen, you don't want to hear about 53%. You want to know where the hell my car is, right? And I think that's the feeling that you get from certain people. But I think you have to be very transparent. I ran on trust and transparency, and that's what we do. We put the numbers out. They are what they are, but more importantly, you got to get behind the numbers and talk about the stories behind them and what you're going to do to try to continue to be able to fix it, so that way you don't have another Julius Greer, right? And that's the important point that I think we try to make regularly. In any of our conversations as it relates to public safety. And then also reminding people that public safety also goes beyond just violence. Public safety is also the work we do around fire. Public safety is also the work we do around healthy response, like our Nurse Navigator program. Public safety is also about expanding our 911 center to make sure that when you call 911, you're getting a great response, and that people have options of things and places where they can go to be able to get the support that they need. So all of that is extremely, extremely important.
Yeah, and I think data is often not comforting.
Right.
You look at numbers.
Yeah, it's
and
cold.
The numbers,
it's
they
static.
don't. Yeah, it is exactly.
It is. That's why with the ATVs, right? People will say, "Oh, what?" First off, one of the things you learn in this job, you better have very thick skin, but you also better know who you are. And like I told you last week, I was speaking to a bunch of young people, and they said, what's some of the advice you can give you? It is better to be hated for what you are than to be loved for something that you are not. So you have to stay true to yourself. So, last week with ATVs, which, by the way, I don't like them. They cause nothing but mayhem and destruction. They are the number one complaint that I get in the mayor's office throughout the months of probably March to July. So that is something that made people feel unsafe. They felt unsafe because of the ATVs. Now, they may not have done anything to scare people, but they made them feel unsafe. So we had to take that on as a issue. That's a quality of life issues. Quality of life issues also make people feel unsafe sometimes, and that's why you have to take them on. And that's why ATVs. You were there. I think you were there when we said you make them either street legal or scrapyard ready. We mean that, and that's a result of the public saying, yeah, okay, Mayor, you're talking about gun violence reduction and the reduction in homicides, but those ATVs, you got to do something about that. So it's a menu of sweets as it relates to public safety, and it's not just one thing.
And when we're talking about perception, I would argue that quality of life issues have just as much, if not more, of an effect on someone's perception of safety than actual violent crime.
Absolutely. And you know why? because sadly, not everyone knows someone that's been shot, but they know someone that might have been run down. If they're at a soccer game, well, let's use a real actual story that happened, because my kid plays baseball. You're at a baseball game and somebody starts revving up ATVs on the field while these kids are playing baseball, and the coach has to go and have an interaction with them, and then it gets escalated, right? So more people can relate to that than someone that might have been shot, and that's where that perception absolutely matters, and that's why quality of life stuff matters, and that's why I know I get criticized sometimes for saying that I'm going to address quality of life stuff, and it's like I have to address it because that also relates to public safety.
So I wanted to move on to housing, but before we get there, I have a email from Sally with the Friends of the Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. Sally says, as you know, the federal government has dissolved the agency that funds libraries and museums across the nation.
Don't get me started.
How is the city of Rochester addressing, sustaining, and supporting the library system for our community?
Well, it's a great question. First off, don't get me started on the federal government. That's a separate show that you'll have to invite me back for.
Happy to.
I have, in fact, I have a meeting today about federal government stuff. There's another big meeting coming up next week that I'm sure our communications will let folks know about after we have it related to the federal government stuff. We are monitoring this extremely closely. We have already quantified what losses and cuts in federal funding will have for us. But, I am extremely committed to libraries. My mother worked in the library. I have a proposal right now to build probably only the second in the state, a library/housing complex. I've expanded library hours. We put esports in our library. We put a new computer lab in our downtown library. We have a music studio in our library. We just finished expanding our library. We're renovating our library in the Northeast. So we are committed to making sure that we maintain our libraries. We're going to wait to see what the effect will be on any of the federal cuts that will happen in our libraries. But you'll see, I don't want to give it away, but my next budget is coming up in, oh my God, is that 2 weeks? 2 weeks, I have my budget that I'll be rolling out. You will see a continued support from our side in the library. We've been very grateful with our partnership with Monroe County. Monroe County also funds some of our library. It's a joint effort between Monroe County and the city of Rochester. So our goal is to make sure that we continue to support libraries. I mean, there is nothing more important than a library. And I need people to understand that this is not your grandmother's library. This is not my library when I used to go, where we might have had the bookmobile and the animals used to come. I mean, this is a library system where you can go and get your taxes done. We have the cash program operating out of the library. We have social services operating out of the library. We have young people that are esports champions operating out of the library. We have an esports team out of the downtown library. You can record a demo tape outside of the downtown library. You can rent a sewing machine from the library. The library has now become MiFi devices. That was our lifeline for individuals who did not have internet during COVID. We were able to use our libraries to distribute test kits and MiFi so people could be connected to the internet. Libraries are absolutely essential to our city. And I really hope that the federal government will change tax and see that they are essential not only to our city or our country. Who I really worry about is not so much our community, but a lot of these rural communities and other places where they don't have the taxing authority or the dollars to be able to support their libraries. Rochester, I think, has some of the best libraries around, bar none, both in the towns as well as in the city.
So moving on to the issue of housing, rent in the city of Rochester. It's risen dramatically since the pandemic. Department of Housing and Urban Development, fair market rent for the Rochester Metro rose 48% between 2020 and 2025, from $775 to $1,149. So what is this administration doing to make sure that every Rochesterian has access to good, safe, affordable housing in the city?
For us, it's build, build, build. Rochester leads the way, and you can check these numbers, in New York State with building the number of affordable housing units. There's nowhere else per capita that has built it the way that we have, and we accelerated this since 2022. So that's important. So for us, I think one of the things that you have to do in order to bring down the cost is you have to try to build as many units as you can, and that's both affordable and market rate, and that is what we have done and we continue to do. And I think that is absolutely critical. The other thing is that if someone wants to be able to own a home, we should be able to make sure that they have a flexible way to be able to make it into home ownership, period. Because for what many people pay in rent, they can pay for a mortgage and actually have ownership in that house. But we have some people who have this mentality where they think that if we're encouraging home ownership, that we're somehow doing it at the expense of renters, which is crazy, right? It's just a crazy paradox, and it's a mindset that we have to break out of in this community. We have to make sure that we have options for everybody, and we've led the way in terms of reconstructing old buildings. I mean, look what we're doing at Hickey Freeman. I mean, we're taking an old factory, turning it into housing, and then having commercial development on the ground. And by the way, right in the heart of the North Clinton Avenue neighborhood. And it's also going to support the other developments that are there. Look what we're doing with a brand new build on the corner of Broad Street in Plymouth, right not too far from City Hall, that is going to be supportive housing with hundreds of units. That is what you have to be able to do to solve the housing issue, because I put on my banker hat. I spent a lot of years in banking, and when I would give my rule of thumb, I'd teach people how to do a budget. A person really shouldn't be paying more than 30% of their income to housing. They just should not be. And for many people, they are. Once you're over 30%, you become rent burdened. So we have to find as many ways as we can to continue to build as many houses as we can. And then the other thing that we have to do is to continue to make sure that we focus on the income issue that we have in the city of Rochester. I mentioned yesterday that RMAPI put out its report that showed that the poverty rate dropped over the last 3 years. Obviously not enough, but it dropped, but it went down, which means that the problem is solvable. We can solve this problem. But we also have not only a dollar amount problem as it relates to rent, but also an income problem, because our rents aren't anywhere near New York City, Boston, San Francisco, or anywhere else. But in Rochester, because incomes are still way too low, it creates a greater burden on people. So when you're now paying over 30% of your income on rent, and your income is already low to begin with, what does that do? And that's why you have to look at this from a holistic perspective. And this is why our workforce development programs have been absolutely critical. This is why our partnership with 1199 SCIU program was critical. I can't mention all of this stuff. I didn't get a chance to mention it all in our State of the City address, but we have a partnership with 1199 SCIU in which they take people who are able to get into jobs that put them in a middle class, that gets them involved in a union, increases their income, gets them in jobs like phlebotomists and technicians, and increases their income, which means that then they then have more dollars to spend on rent and other important things to set themselves up for a strong financial future. So this conversation about housing has to be comprehensive. It just can't be one size fits all, and it can't be gimmicky. I know gimmicky gets attention. It makes people get some clicks, but this is not a easy conversation. It's a lot of hard work, and we have had to work hard to get the almost $2 billion in housing since 2022. And we've gotten money from other cities, which I won't say, because they couldn't move fast enough to get it done. We moved in. That's why Center City Courtyard is moving faster, because there was another city that missed the boat. And I raised my hand. I said, hey, we're ready. Rochester's ready. And that's what we're going to continue to do. That's going to be our strategy. Affordable, market rate, home ownership. Some people say drill, baby, drill. I say build, baby, build. And we're going to continue to try to build as much housing as we can.
Part of the problems that we have here in the city when it comes to actually single-family homes themselves is we have an aging housing stock. And when you have programs like Buy the Block, which started under the previous administration and expanded under your administration, this is a way to build new homes that can be bought by first-time home buyers. The southwest portion of the project off Genesee Street had about 30 built or part of the program, which is not nothing, but is it large enough to feed the need for how many houses are needed for?
Yeah, but I have to remind people again. See, this is the short-sightedness of people. Government doesn't have the money to build hundreds of thousands of new homes. That's not the point. That's not the point of these programs. These programs are meant to be the catalyst. What did I say last night? We chose By the Block in the Thomas Street area in the northeast section of the city because, yes, we built about 27 homes there, but private development, First Genesis Corporation, are building hundreds. They're going to build dozens and dozens of homes built for home ownership, and then another senior apartment that's going to have hundreds of units. So that's the idea. The idea of the structure is not just that government builds it, but that you partner with others to make sure that you get the catalyst and the spark to be able to build other ones. We're also one of the only people in the state that got the THIP grant from New York State. THIP works with dilapidated structures that are in those neighborhoods. So when we say By the Block, and by the way, the first By the Block house, the first one didn't open up until 2023, okay? So I was mayor. 2023 was the first one it opened up. We wanted to make sure that we accelerate the development of entire neighborhoods, not just with 47 houses that are built, but with the other development that is happening around it. So each person is contributing to that overall development. And by the way, I tell people, you got a family of 4, that's thousands of people, right, that have been impacted by these houses that are being built. And by the way, there's nowhere else in New York State where a city is taking the lead in home construction. Not one. And if you find one, tell me. There isn't one. Not Buffalo, not Syracuse, not Albany, not New York City, not one. But we're doing it here in Rochester. And I say we are doing it here in Rochester because we're doing it with Habitat for Humanity, Greater Rochester Housing Partnership, Ibero-American Development. We're doing this as a partnership, and I am damn proud of it. And it's something that I won't streak away from because we're doing what others are not doing. And you know who's recognizing it? People across the country in New York State. That's who's recognizing it.
So, and the other big part about the housing as a whole, I mean, there's so many layers and nuances to it, but it's holding accountability for landlords.
Oh, yeah.
Which the city now has a housing attorney, something that is, I would argue, was long overdue to finally have. But I just want you to give you an opportunity to speak on how some of these landlords that have let houses go derelict, have not repaired things that have caused health and safety hazards, how the city is moving to hold them accountable and make sure that they are keeping a standard of living that is, frankly, humanitarian for the city of Rochester.
Well, you know what the standard of living is. You heard what I said during the speech yesterday. I don't know if you remember what I said. You remember what the question I said was a person should ask as it relates to their house? I'm going to see if you were paying attention.
I was paying attention, but fill me in. My memory isn't as good as it used to be.
Gino wasn't paying attention. You should know it. It's the thing. Would I want to live here?
Fair. Okay, I do remember that.
Do you remember that?
Fair enough.
I saw you get up a couple of times, Gino. I know it was a long speech. You and my son were...
I get restless.
Yeah, I saw you getting restless. I saw you looking at your watch a couple of times. Look, but should I want to live here, right? That is the message. And I've been clear. The housing attorney, we take him to city court or state Supreme Court. We've gotten close to $1 million in recoveries that we gotten from people. And what I've said was when people say, well, I'm going to sell my stuff and get out of the Rochester market. Well, most of the people that say that, we want them to do that. And that's what we have encouraged them to do. This was a problem that had been building for decades, right?
Absolutely.
It builds for decades. And what I laugh about is, and people say, wow, okay, I think I was in office for 4 months when I appointed the Housing Quality Task Force. And I actually had people say, oh, you didn't solve it yet. I said, wait a minute, I've been here 4 months. But we moved aggressively, quickly, and decisively. And we made sure that that it was not fit for man or mouse, that we stepped in, but more importantly, that we said we were going to send a message by holding those accountable that were getting in the business that had absolutely no business getting in the business. And that's what we're doing. And that's what our housing attorney is doing. Oh, by the way, we're also one of the only cities in New York State that has a housing attorney that is dealing with these issues on both commercial structures as well as residential structures. We had to send a message that we had these teeth. You remember what I called them? I'm testing you.
Saber-tooth tiger.
There you go. He was listening.
Oh, of course I remember that one.
And I got the saber-tooth tiger on my desk. And Gino, we're using it and people don't like it. But you know who does like it? The good landlords. Because the good landlords were getting a bad name from the bad landlords. And I mean, when you have somebody in New York City, this is a true story. There is one guy, and I think you may have reported on him. You did do a story on this. I mean, he owes like, I mean, we're going after him for multi-millions of dollars.
$131 million.
$131 million. I don't know if we'll ever go after him. But he should not be able to do business anywhere in the world. Period. But this guy, for years, had gotten away with having substandard properties, being an absentee landlord, and thinking he can get away with it. So we said, no, we are not going to have it. And I think that we sent that message loud and clear. And I just didn't want to send the message by standing on the steps of City Hall, yelling and screaming about what should be done. You actually got to have action behind these things. And that's what I do. We have to move from rhetoric to results. And there's way too much rhetoric in this world. And it's why people hate politics. And I got that. I remember I remember a woman telling me, Mayor, just make sure that you work to make sure you get results. Leave the rhetoric to the rhetoric people. They stand up, we need to do it. And it's like, okay, but here is the problem. You've identified it. But what's the solution? And that was our solution. Our solution was making sure that we had a housing attorney, that we increased the number of code enforcement officers, that we also made sure that we applied to the state for our THIP program, that we expanded our Buy the Block program, that we accelerated the pace of building of affordable and market rate housing. That is part of the overall comprehensive housing strategy. The strategy just can't be that I'm going to get people into housing. You actually have to have a strategy that works and is coordinated and collaborative with other people in order to make it happen. And I think that that's what you see with our housing attorney. It's not going to solve everything, but it's one piece of the overall puzzle as we talk about making sure that we have housing in a city where people will say, would I want to live there? Would I want to live there?
So as we're moving from housing to development as a whole, if reelected, you are likely to oversee some of the largest development projects the city has seen in decades. Top of the list there is Interloop North, price tag of about $220 million. And I want to get a sense, because you did talk about this during the State of the City last night, is how it best serves the neighbors of where the Interloop is now. This was a urban highway that was built that separated a neighborhood. It's filling it in can be argued as an undoing a past wrong.
Right. How
do you do that and make sure the voices of the people that live in that neighborhood are heard and put forefront?
Yeah. So, I won my Democratic primary June 24th, I think, of 2021. The next day I was on the phone with Charles Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, and they said, what do you want from us? I said, you know what? I need the Interloop to be funded. And a week later, we were there announcing $100 million for the we were there talking about getting money for that Interloop. My first business day in office, the governor was here. I said, I need that money for the Interloop, and I need a state park. Fast forward February 2022, we got $100 million for the Interloop, and then Chuck Schumer secured another $100+ million for the Interloop. So now we have $200 million from the Interloop. I say that because it takes work. This takes work to be able to do this. It takes partnership. It takes collaboration. But what we've said to the neighbors are very clear, that we will not do this project to them. We will do it with them. The first Interloop, it should have never been done. You tore apart a vibrant neighborhood of churches, of business owners, of homes, and displaced these people by putting something that was basically a moat for polluting the area with cars. And we don't want that to happen again. And now that we have this unique once-in-a-generation opportunity, this is literally a once-in-a-generation opportunity. You won't see this again for another 100 years. Mm-hmm. How do you make sure that it continues to work when you have 20-plus acres of developable land where you can build homes, where you can have businesses, where you can have great green space, where you can where you can make sure that we're one community, we're not separated by a loop, we're actually continuously all together. This gives us a very, very unique opportunity to be able to do that. And I think that we will continue to engage the community. And we started very early. And I think in the beginning, people were like, why are you talking about this? It's not going to happen until 2026, 27, because we want to make sure that people were on the ground ready. And the other thing is we want to make sure that there's some workforce development components so that way people that live in the neighborhoods can have the ability to also work on this project. Because imagine 50 years from now, someone can tell their grandkids, hey, I worked on that project. I was there a part when we were bringing Rochester, when we were bringing the city back together. And so this gives us a very, very unique opportunity. But I need to remind the listeners that this was hard work. This money wasn't just sitting around. We had to go to the state. And almost all of our big projects, the city, we can't afford to do these projects on our own. Our budget doesn't apply for that. Our bonding authority. So all of our big projects, all of our big capital projects, all those big shiny projects that people talk about, those are all capital dollars that come from New York State. And if they didn't come to Rochester, they would go take the money and put it somewhere else. But I've been making sure that we get our fair share, and that Interloop dollars are proof positive of us being very effective in getting the dollars that Rochester deserves that we've been missing out on for so many years.
I want to return to that point. We're going to take our first and only break of the hour, and we'll be back talking more with Mayor Malik Evans.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, providing education and life skills solutions designed to empower individuals and the families of those with complex disabilities. Mary Cariola Center, transforming lives of people with disabilities. More at marycariola.org.
And we are back on Connections. I'm Gino Finale, sitting in for Evan Dawson. We are talking to Mayor Malik Evans about the state of the city, following the address last night. And where we left off was talking about federal funding with a presidential administration which, one, has called for the withholding of funds to sanctuary cities like Rochester. I think it's a worthy question to ask of what's the path forward here. I mean, the city does receive federal funding.
We do. We receive federal funding. It's a significant amount of money. But first off, let me say that we are in compliance with any federal law. We are. Our city policy, which has been around since 1986, has confirmed that. We would not violate the law. I take an oath to uphold the law. So we believe that we follow the law. But I also want to remind people that New York State, City of Rochester, sends a significant amount of money down to the federal government. So I need people to understand that this is not the federal government's money. Period. It's not their money. Your money. The taxpayers' money that you send to the federal government. Mm-hmm. When you get a tax refund, you say, oh, I'm getting a tax refund. That's the money that you paid that you're getting back. So for anybody that think they can use your hard-earned tax dollars as a cudgel, or a cudgel, we're not gonna tolerate it in Rochester. So we are not gonna take anything laying down as it relates to anybody trying to remove dollars from us. Because number one, we follow the law. And number two, why should I have to beg for something that already belongs to us? I mean, it's like somebody coming to your house and then you got to beg them to go to be able to use the bathroom. Wait a minute, I'm asking you to use the bathroom in my own house? So we're going to have to ask the federal government to please don't take money from us that we send to Washington? New York State is probably tops in terms of the state in terms of sending money to Washington. The only time that wasn't the case was during COVID, when we got a lot more COVID relief funds. But those funds have now gone. Mm-hmm. So you can do the analysis and see how much money New York State sends to Washington, D.C. So this notion that the federal government can somehow, number one, tell localities what to do or threaten localities with money that, by the way, is already their money, is just lunacy and something that we're not going to take standing down. And I'll tell you that this is a conversation that is just not happening here in Rochester. It's happening at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. It's happening with the Democratic Mayors Association. It's happening with the New York State Conference of Mayors. These are all organizations that I'm meeting with on a regular basis. I'm on the phone every other week. Got a meeting today with Congressman Morelli about this, a meeting next week with local community leaders about this. This is something that people need to pay attention to, because in many of these situations, these are things like life and death. I mean, when you have talks about cutting things that have been very effective, like Head Start or drug treatment programs, when we all agree that we have an opioid epidemic that is the worst in this generation. So this notion of federal funds being withheld from anybody is just not something that we can stand for, because it's not like we're begging for something that is not ours. This is not some kind of charity or philanthropy. These are tax-paying dollars of citizens of Rochester, Monroe County, and New York State.
So in these conversations that you're having about what you do in this situation, what do you do? I mean, how do you stand up for the fact that this is our money and that the city complies with all laws, that taking away federal funds that we paid into is inherently at odds with the idea of an independent city.
Yeah.
What do you do to actually stand up to the federal government as a result of that?
Well, there's lots of avenues. I mean, we were just on an amicus brief. I mean, we didn't advertise it well. We were just on an amicus brief with several cities on behalf of the University of Rochester, where they tried to cut NIH funding, which would have been absolutely detrimental to the city of Rochester and the hundreds of thousands of city residents that work at U of R. So there's that avenue. There's advocacy. There's leaning in to the facts and putting it out there. But it's also making sure that we work very closely with our with our representatives in Washington, and that's Senator Schumer, Gillibrand, Morelli, as well as our state representatives, because a lot of the federal funds also flow through the federal government as well as the county. So it really has been really convening and working with all of these folks that are there. And as mayor, you're really the quarterback, because you can't control everything. But there are things in which we have standing where others don't, in which we can make our voices heard in order to make sure that we stop a lot of this stuff. And if someone goes against the law, and we have a very good law department, then we will also see what we can do from get relief from a legal standpoint. So that's what you have to be able to do. But what you can't do is throw your hands up and say, oh, there's nothing we can do. Or what you can't do is just get up and yell about it and then not do anything, because that's what people are sick of. They want to be able to see results. And they also want to know that there are people fighting for them, but they want to make sure that there are people fighting for them and getting results, and not just having a bunch of rhetoric. And that's what we've been trying to do, and that's what we will continue to do. And we'll monitor this as it happens. Knock on wood. I think the jury is still out. The federal budget, is set to be done again in September. So in a couple of months, we'll really start to see where the rubber meets the road. The other thing I want to say is that you can't only believe in the rule of law when it suits you. You can't only believe in the rule of law when it suits you. And if someone or an entity has appropriated dollars for something through a legally outlined process, like Congress, who controls the appropriations process, and they've allocated money to a municipality or a nonprofit organization, right now, unless it's interpreted some different way in a court of law, it is illegal to pull back money that has already been allocated to you through an appropriations process. That's number one. But then I'll go back to my first point, which is we should not have to beg for money that is already ours anyway. These are taxpayer dollars.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now with what the future even looks like. And on the issue of this particularly sanctuary cities, I've had a lot of conversations with people that are scared of what happens going forward, that may have family that's undocumented, and how the city will, what the city will do to maintain that sanctuary status. And I want to give you a chance to talk about that part of the issue of Rochester sanctuary status. I mean, what would you say to someone who is scared about what the federal government is doing right now and what the city plans to do?
Well, look, I would say that, I gave the quote yesterday from Martin Luther King about exhaustion. Mm-hmm. You cannot give in to exhaustion. As I said to a group the other day, I said, I will always follow the law. I have to follow the law. And we believe that we are following the law. But we will also make sure that we advocate for our values and for what we believe in as a city of immigrants. That's what we are. There's only one group of people that weren't immigrants, and it's people that look like me, black folks that came here as slaves. Mm-hmm. Everybody else, and Native Americans.
Yeah, I was thinking that one too.
Yep, Native Americans and folks that came here as slaves. And by the way, my people have been here for hundreds of years. So the question is that are we going to turn away from that as a country and as a city? I think the question in Rochester is no. We're going to follow the law. And that has been my conversations with anybody in the federal government since forever. We follow the law. We don't break the law, but don't try to push things on us that we're not responsible for. And I think that's the note. I think that's the note that people need to take away with. We need to make sure that people still feel safe and feel valued. But if people are concerned, I mean, I wish I could say they shouldn't be, but they should be. They should be concerned, because the minute you're not concerned means that you are not paying attention. But I would tell you, as I said yesterday, you cannot give in to exhaustion. But I think the other thing is that what we must have is we must have results and not rhetoric. And there is just so much stuff now.
A lot of noise.
A lot of noise. I mean, we didn't talk about social media, but
I try to avoid it. Yeah.
But you know how I feel about social media. I'm just so sick and tired of elected officials just doing performative stuff without actually getting results. I think it's why it's hurt Democrats. I think it's why it turns people off politically. It's why it's hard to get people to be able to vote, because they're like, what are you doing? You're just putting on a show. But what are the results that you're getting? And that's why the State of the City address is so important, because I'm able to actually give people concrete numbers. Even if they don't want to listen to it, I'm able to actually say, okay, I told you I was going to do this. Here's where we are, and here's where we fell short. But what we have more so of is people identifying a problem, getting everybody into a tizzy, and then not providing any type of solution other than this rhetoric. And I think that is what people get tired of, because you know what? It's hard work to do what I just talked about, to bring groups of people together to meet, to file lawsuits when necessary, to be able to get nonprofit organizations together. It's very, very hard to do those things, and it takes a lot of work. And I hear that we're coming down to the end of the program, because I hear the music.
The music is coming on.
That means that I'm being played off like the Sandman or at the Oscars or the Grammys. So I'll stop talking there and turn it back over to you, Gino.
Well, Mayor, I appreciate the time on this. Has been Mayor Malik Evans talking about the state of the city. I'm Gino Finelli. I'm an investigative reporter with WXXI. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Gino.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.